I was raised with birds. It was the 70s, the time of the Beretta TV show. In the opening sequence, Robert Blake, who plays Detective Beretta, has a big white cockatoo that answers the telephone for him. Well, my dad wanted that bird. So he did a little research, talked to a bird guide that owed him some money, and that night he came home with Sam, a big white cockatoo. He bought a fancy Mexican wrought iron cage and set it up in the back of the house near the sliding glass door. From there, the morning call at sunrise ripped through the house. It had no problem waking everyone in the suburban two-story. In fact, the neighbors complained at length about the bird. Once woken to the call of the wild, Sam put on his tame routine for Dad. Perched on his shoulders, Sam ate scrambled eggs out of the corner of Dad's mouth. Then, back into his cage, riding Dad's finger. No complaints. But when we got home from school and Dad was still at work, the bird had reverted to its true wild nature. The bird had inevitably gotten out of its cage. Mom just couldn't see him jailed up all day long. He found a natural perch on the chain of the swag lamp over the couch in the den, or on the gold filigree mirror in the formal living room, sharpening his beak on the corners and creeping deeply into the shag pile carpeting. The clear electrical wire, interwoven into the decorative chain of the swag lamp, proved too spicy for the bird. It plucked the plastic off the copper conduit and blew up its beak. We had to cut the lights when Sam took to flight. Sam was a beautiful bird, all white, feathered topknot that came up when he was excited, playful, or just needed to look intimidating. He danced back and forth on a perch of wood in his cage, bobbing his head when he was happy. With a wingspan of nearly 3 feet, he pumped his nimble pinion once, twice, and took to a soar, up high into the vaulted formal living room, halting near the ceiling. Then a dead dive, carving back through the arched Spanish pillars, rounding the narrow hallway. Kids hit the deck! Now rounding back through the den and kitchen and cutting smack, bam, into the mirror of the wet bar. More than once tangling into the cords of the hanging Romanesque rain lamp whose oil fouled Sam's wings. There was just not enough space and too many weird obstacles in the house for a bird of his size. His afternoon silence was broken by a frenzy of kids returning back from school. Grammy, us kids, and a friend or two sent Sam into a swooping harangue of feathers and squawks. He'd land on a grassy child head and the bird would tip his head to the side and pluck the hair out from the roots. Squirm, and he'd bite you squarely on the back of the neck. Out of fear or excitement, it made no difference to him. All you could do was hit the deck, and he would fly off. The dogs, Snoopy and Pepper, lunged into the sky at the flyer, but on the ground, top knot up, wings out, fire in Sam's face, he'd let out a throaty hiss. The beagle, a bird dog, and the cockapoo wanted no part of this cockatoo. They'd back up, bark at him, or just walk away. In the kitchen, there was a heavy wooden dining table, antique chairs freshly covered with yellow patent leather, with little filigree spires made 100-year-old oak. Like all the wooden corners in the house, the bird had chewed to a stubby point like wave-muted sandcastles. On poker night, with guys like Dave Gold and Panarisi and some of Dad's other poker players, they'd rear back and take turns busting Mom's chairs. These were big guys. They drank scotch and smoked, and Sam sat at Dad's shoulder at the head of the table. The next morning, calmly eating eggs with Dad. Not wild at all. Not for Dad. Sam was a one-man bird. The morning lessons. Hello, pretty bird. Hello, pretty bird. Dad said over and over. But tried through repetition and the use of the bird-talking records. It was to no avail. Sam would never talk. He was just not that kind of guy. It's true that any hook-beaked bird can learn to speak, but some breeds take to it better than others. There was, of course, the squawking, as Dad called it. The bird was about 1.5 feet tall and has a call that can be heard clear across miles of Amazon jungle. Put that in your living room and smoke it, as my mom would say. the morning sun for sure, but any time of agitation. A visitor to the house, to get out of school time, the squawking would start. Thunderous, repetitious, endless. Only by smoldering could you stop the sound. A special sheet thrown over the cage quelched the bird in its own harangue. So, in frustration, Dad went back to the bird guy, and that night he came home with Nappy. According to the bird guy, the best way to teach a bird to talk is with another talking bird. Nappy was the bird for the job. An African gray parrot, we didn't know if Nappy was short for Napoleon or just a comment on the state of the bird's feathers. Indoor anxiety had led to a feather plucking habit, and poor Nappy was an ugly bird. But he spoke like no other. Nappy's growing vocabulary would be revealed in short time. The bird came with a parlor trick. A couple of routines Dad learned from the bird guy guaranteed to land Nappy a new home. Nappy had his very own cage, a cheap anodized aluminum number that Dad sat on the kitchen table and performed the trick. Okay, Nappy, come on out, Dad's new command, and the bird opened the cage and climbed the bars to the top. Hello! The bird said and stood there for a moment, waiting for Dad's next command. He ceremoniously put his fingers around Nappy's neck. Choke the chicken, Nappy would reply, and then when he let go, I love you, with a kind of question in his voice. Okay, Nappy, get back into your cage, Dad's final command. So Nappy climbs down the cage, lets him in, does a few head nods on his perch, and says, Bye-bye! Nappy was all gray to the pad of each of its 3 fingers. White, gray, creepy cold, yellow eyes peered at you like a snow husky or some kind of prehistoric beast. He'd mutter something under his breath as he walked up your hand, pigeon-toed, you son of a bitch. Then louder, I love you, with a sarcastic tone. Nappy didn't bite, and he didn't seem to want to fly around like Sam did. He was quite docile. But it wasn't long before we realized that he could cuss in several languages. He'd make a kissy sound and say something about a puta. And there was a lot of other outbursts in languages we didn't really understand. He announced the doorbell, the telephone, and on rare occasions actually made the sound of the telephone, just to mess with us. He also liked to mess with the dogs. Snoopy, Pepper, come here, boys. Then he made a dog whistle. The stupid pooches would come running, and the bird would laugh at him, mutter some kind of insult. To wake the kids up in the morning, Dad called up from the bottom of the stairs. Pal, Elise, get up, come to the stairs. They were supposed to stumble to the top of the steps so Dad could see that they were actually awake. Then they turned around and go back into bed. So this would happen about 3 or 4 times every morning. The ridiculousness of the situation was not lost on Nappy. He'd mock the charade in Dad's comical voice. Ah! Please! Get up! Come to the stairs! And then he'd throw in, you son of a bitch! Nappy provided a running parody of the suburban family motif, complete with inappropriate comments. Now, in the morning, Dad had 2 birds on his shoulder, like Angel and Devil, giving him consultation, feeding them both egg out of the corner of his mouth. Sam paid no attention to Nappy whatsoever. He was from the Amazon, and Nappy was from Africa, born a world away, now cohabitating in Burbank, California. I'm not sure if Sam ever recognized Nappy as a bird, but Nappy knew. Sam, you're bad! Bad bird! I love you! But he'd say the same thing about himself. Nappy showed up a borrowed bird to do a job, to teach Sam to talk. But it wasn't long before the idea of giving the gray back was out of the question. I wondered how many owners Nappy had had before us. As my mom says, the damn bird outlives you. 80 years. You gotta line up the next owner before you die. How many different languages and countries had he lived in? Who could tell? But the why became apparent. Fuck you, fuck you, fuck you, fuck you, fuck you. It went on for hours. Brilliant Nappy concocted new sentences and strung along cuss words like a sailor, intercut with kissy sounds, whoop-woos, and wet whistles. I love you, baby! All of this became quite normal until somebody came to the house. Dad would flop the cheap cage down on the big kitchen table, and Nappy and Dad went through the rotation of the trick. The reaction was always the same. At this time, no one had ever seen a real talking bird. Maybe on a TV show or something, but not in someone's home. They are always left with the dumbfounded bewilderment on their face. Around the time Nappy had become a permanent fixture in the house, Christmas was coming and it was our turn to host Elomi, our other grandmother. Dad's mom was coming off of her island with all the stuff that she needed and moving in with us for 2 weeks during the Christmas break. Now the big concern was the cussin' bird. So Dad consulted the bird guy. What do I do with this cussin' bird? My mom's coming for Christmas and she's very strict. Not only was she strict, but she wouldn't let anything slip by. She'd let you have it if you did something she didn't like, and she had a mysterious assortment of rules that you could never quite figure out. We were always in trouble. So, in his infinite wisdom, the bird guy laid it out. What you gotta do is teach the bird another word to say that sounds like the cuss word. The bird will learn that one instead, and there you have it. Sounded like a shell game to me, but it seemed simple enough to Dad. So each morning at the breakfast table, he put the notion to work. Nappy'd say, fuck, and Dad would say, duck, fuck, duck, fuck, duck, fuck. Nappy had 100 different ways of saying fuck, and he was having a good time with the whole thing. Duck, fuck, duck. God damn it, Nappy, duck. Nappy, you're bad. Bad bird. You son of a bitch. That part he'd mutter in his bed. Well, none of this was working out, and the time was coming. Elomi was on her way. There was a lot of other preparation, so the foul-mouthed bird went on the back burner. Oddly, there was no incident. We'd gotten into the second week without a peep from Nappy. Elomi didn't pay much mind to the birds. She'd been around before when it was just Sam and didn't much care for the squawking. So the birds were covered most of the time and weren't allowed to fly free and terrorize the house. It was one of the last days of her trip. It was morning. I was standing near the sliding glass door. The sun shined a swath across the room between the living room and kitchen. I could see that she was there, but I couldn't quite make out what she was doing. Sanka, I think. That's what she was making. She had Dad put in a hot water dispenser so she could make the instant brew, a combination of pencil shavings and aluminum that her doctor had put her on to replace coffee for the high blood pressure. Death might have been better, but there she was. I noticed a stir in Nappy's cage, and I could see his shoulders twitching like something was coming over him. I heard a slow, soft, fuck. He got more and more agitated, and Nappy was screaming, fuck, fuck, as loud as he could. I turned around to Elomi to see how she was taking it. Nothing, totally unfazed. It was as if somehow she didn't recognize that the bird was speaking, let alone what it was saying. I was having a hard time trying not to break into laughter. The whole build-up and everything, and now it was just me and her and the fuck-talking bird. And he went on. It crescendoed with fuck, fuck, fuck duck, fuck duck, fuck duck, fuck duck. She stopped there at the sink. A cloud must have passed in front of the sun because I could see her. She transported up to me. She looked me dead in the face and without any emotion whatsoever. I think that bird is cussing. She paused there. The look of horror must have come over my face. The tips of my ears filled with hot blood. I didn't know what was coming next or what to think. I'm gonna wash its mouth out with soap.